Sorry, go ahead. All right. May it please the court, your honors. I, Joaquin Cruz, and my partner, Jacob Shaw, will represent the petitioners, the people in this case. Today, the question in front of this courtroom is a very simple one. Is oil a finite resource? I'll speak on the first point of error, how is oil created? This is a fundamental aspect to this entire case. We will prove what oil actually is, how it is created, and what is happening in the oil markets today. To do so, we pose a question. Why does everybody seem to believe in Hubert's peak oil theory? Why does the public believe in this theory? Within our argument, I present convincing evidence that peak oil is a theory based on a false premise, that oil is a finite resource, and I will show how oil is actually created. Sir Fred Hoyle in 1982 commented the suggestion that petroleum might have arisen from some transformation of squash fish or biological detritus is surely the silliest notion to be entertained by substantial numbers of persons over an extended period of time. Charles E. Melton and A. A. Gardine in 1983 explained the general concept of petroleum formation by biogenic mechanisms has been firmly entrenched for a long time, but there's been no accumulation of convincing experimental evidence in support of this belief. Currently, the publicly held theory is that oil and gas are both derived through the natural and lengthy decomposition of organic detritus. Therefore, people would naturally believe that oil is a finite resource that will eventually run out. In this courtroom today, we will show you that oil and gas are continuously formed and replaced from a purely physical and chemical thermodynamic process that continuously regenerates oil from ultra deep levels below 9,000 meters. Then the inference here is that oil may perhaps not be a finite resource and that there's plenty of it. First, oil and gas origins, biogenic or abiotic? Do oil and gas originate from the biological decomposition of organic material, biotic, or do they originate from the biological decomposition of organic material, or do they originate simply through a natural physical and chemical thermodynamic process involving just heat and pressure, abiotic? It is notable that the whole of Hubert's theory of peak oil rests completely on the assumption that oil is biogenic in origin. Therefore, oil is a finite resource. Simply everyone believes this because everyone believes this is a fact. I've also read that this biogenic theory directly contradicts and offends the second law of thermodynamics. Evidence for the Western biogenic theory of oil formation. First, in 1757, Russian scholar Mikhail Lemont put forward a hypothesis that suggested that oil came from biological detritus. This was based upon the theory that was first introduced by George Agricole, who was a German scientist in 1556. George based his work on Greek Aristotle's work. In 1757, applying little more than observation and limited analytical tools available in his time, Russian scholar Lemont is generally considered to have fathered the theory that crude oil, after pre-corroding for a great duration of time, might originate from biological material. The notion that oil is a fossil fuel was first proposed by Russian scholar Lemont. Lemont's rudimentary hypothesis, based on the limited base of scientific knowledge that existed at the time, and on his own simple observation, was that rock oil originates as tiny bodies of animals buried in the sediments, which under the influence of increased temperature and pressure, acting during an unimaginably long period of time, transform into rock oil. 2.5 centuries later, Lemont's theory remains as it was in 1757, an unproved and almost entirely speculative hypothesis. Returning once again to the Wall Street Journal, we find that although the world has been drilling for oil for generations, little is known about the nature of the resource or the underground activities that led to its creation. In spite of the great amount of scientific research, there remain many unresolved questions regarding its origins. Does that not seem a little odd? We are talking here, after all, about a resource that by all accounts plays a crucial role in a vast array of human endeavors. By one published account, petroleum is a raw ingredient in 70,000 manufactured products. By many accounts, the very survival of the human race is entirely dependent on the availability of petroleum, and yet we know almost nothing about this Earth's life-sustaining resources. And even though by some shrill accounts, the well is about to run dry, no one seems to be overly concerned with the understanding the nature and origins of so-called fossil fuels. We are rather content with continuing to embrace an unproved 18th century theory that is subjected to any sort of logical analysis seems ludicrous. As anyone who stayed awake during high school science class knows, oil comes from dinosaurs. I remember as a student hearing my teacher go over and over the fact that oil was a fossil fuel and we were running out of it. It seemed a reasonable enough idea at the time from the perspective of a 16-year-old, but if as an adult you stop to give it some thought, doesn't the idea seem preposterous? How could dinosaurs have possibly created the planet's vast oil fields? Did millions or even billions of them die at the very same time and at the very same place? Were there dinosaur Jonestowns on a grand scale occurring at all locations across the planet? And how did they all get buried so quickly? Because if they weren't buried right away, wouldn't they have just decomposed or been consumed by scavengers? And how much oil can really squeeze from a pile of parched dead dinosaur skeletons? How many dead dinosaurs does it take to make a barrel of oil? How many barrels of oil have we used so far? If dinosaurs caused the oil, or more correctly, their dead bodies decaying caused the oil, there shouldn't be a simple formula to figure out how many dinosaurs it took to make the oil. Isn't this science in reverse? If oil were a fossil fuel, could you not figure out this one simple fact? Also, wouldn't that make all oil the same age? But if all oil were the same age, that would mean that dinosaurs that made the oil all had to die at the same time. Correct. Maybe there was some type of cataclysmic event that caused a sudden extinction of dinosaurs and also buried them, like the impact of an asteroid or a comet. But even so, you wouldn't think that all dinosaurs would have been huddled together waiting to become oil fields. And besides, scientists are now backing away from this mass extinction theory. Does this mean without mass extinction, we could not have oil as a fossil fuel? Does it also mean that since oil we have today in one oil field was all made at one time, that all oil had to come from some sort of sudden extinction? Then if dinosaurs lived for millions of years before, what did their dead bodies produce? Therefore, it would take a pretty big pile of dead dinosaurs to account for the estimated 660 billion barrels of oil in the Middle East. I don't know the precise dinosaur carcass to barrel of oil conversion rate is, but it does seem like it would take a hell of a lot of dead dinosaurs. Even if we generously allow that a single dinosaur could yield 5 barrels of oil, an absurd notion, but let's play along for now. More than 100 billion dinosaurs would have to be simultaneously entombed in just one small region of the world. But were there really hundreds of billions of dinosaurs roaming the earth? If so, then one wonders why there's all this talk now of overpopulation when all we're currently dealing with is a few billion humans populating the same earth. Could the earth have had 130 billion dinosaurs in one place like the Middle East? Now you would also have to multiply that for the United States, Mexico, Venezuela, Russia, Nigeria, and all other leading oil-producing areas. Quickly, you would see that we would have over 1 trillion dinosaurs on Earth, all dying at one time. We have found some fossils, but have we found them in that type of scale? The answer is a resounding no. And why the Middle East? Was that region some kind of mecca for dinosaurs? Was it the climate or the lack of water and vegetation that drew them there? Of course, the region could have been much different in prehistoric times. Maybe it was like the Great Valley in the Land Before Times movies. Or maybe the dinosaurs had to cross the Middle East to get to the Great Valley, but never made it because they got bogged down in the desert and ultimately became, through I'm guessing here, some alchemic process, cans of mortar ore. Another version of the fossil fuel story holds that microscopic animal carcasses and other biological matter gathered on the world's seafloors, with that organic matter then being covered over with sediment over the course of millions of years, would turn into oil. You would think, however, that any biological matter would decompose long before being covered over by sediment. But I guess not. And I guess there were no bottom feeders in those days to clear the ocean floors of organic debris. Fair enough, but I don't understand how those massive piles of biological detritus, some consisting of hundreds of billions of tons of matter, could have just suddenly appeared so that they can then sit undisturbed for millions of years as they were covered over with sediment. I can understand how biological detritus could accumulate over time, mixed in with sediment, but that wouldn't really create the conditions for the generation of vast reservoirs of crude oil. So I guess I must be missing something here. This theory makes some sense, correct? How we found that in most cases, places that have produced oil in the past, West Texas and the Middle East, for example, were old seabeds, so maybe this theory is correct. It wasn't the dinosaurs entirely, it was all of the plants and animals in the ocean that died. This makes perfect sense until you begin to apply some questions like, did all the plants and animals in the ocean die at once? How can you have oil created from the surface of the earth downward and have the oil at the top the same age as the oil at the bottom? Simply you can't, because according to their own theory that oil is made all at once. For example, let's look at a cook preparing a large kettle of homemade soup. He puts the stock in the kettle, heats the kettle slowly, and then adds different parts of the soup. As the soup is is cooking, he continues to add ingredients. He adds ingredients until the exact time the soup is served. Would all the ingredients be cooked? Would all the ingredients be done? The answer is of course not. I realize that it is soup and it is not oil, but the analogy is very much the same. You must question the fact that biologically speaking, for oil to be biotic, would have to have a single source or cause and would have to be cooked from the bottom up, not the top down. This means clearly that if oil is a fossil fuel, fossils have to be found at the base of the deposits of oil. This means fossils would have to be found at levels deeper than the oil is currently being pumped at. Today, Russia has many oil wells that are over 30,000 feet deep, yet the deepest a fossil has been found is 16,000 feet below the surface of the earth. In conclusion, let's compare the two theories of how oil was created and see which one makes more sense. The Montel's theory of 1757, you either had trillions of dinosaurs dying at the same time or plants and animals in the ocean dying at the same time. After they die, they all decay at the same time and create oil. Cross-apply these factors. First, for oil to be a fossil fuel, we'd have to be overpopulated with dinosaurs. Second, they all had to die at the same time. Third, oil on the top of the oil field would have to be newer than the oil at the bottom of the field. Fourth, fossils would have to be found at the bottom of all areas that are being drilled. The interesting fact is that none of this happened. Bones of dinosaurs have not been found in numbers sufficient to justify point one. No scientific evidence has been shown to cause point number two. The age of oil in field doesn't differ, and fossils have been only found 16,000 feet, even though they are producing wells twice as deep. Whereas the abiotic petroleum hypothesis first gained significant exposure outside the Soviet Union during the 1977 gasoline crisis, when Cornell astrophysicist Thomas Gold published an editorial in the Wall Street Journal, in which he claimed that the most deep hydrocarbons are generated abiotically in the mantle and migrate to the crust, where they act as an energy source for microbes, producing a deep microbial ecosystem, the deep hot biosphere, that may rival the surface biosphere in mass and volume. The organic remains of microbes in the deep hot biosphere represent the source of biological molecules in petroleum as a biological overprint onto an abiogenic organic mixture. The proposal contains an implicit concession that the biological molecules in petroleum cannot be generated by polymerization of methane. Echoing some of the previous arguments of the Russian-Ukrainian school, Gold presented several lines of evidence for abiotic petroleum, including, first, the presence of clearly abiotic hydrocarbons and other organic molecules in meteorites and on other solar system bodies. Second, plausible synthetic pathways for mantle hydrocarbon production. Third, the association of hydrocarbon deposits with the helium and other trace gases presumably from mantle sources. Fourth, the existence of extensive deep microbial communities that impart an overprint of biomarkers onto the abiotic petroleum. Fifth, the tendency of hydrocarbons reservoirs to occur at many depths in a single locality, implying an underlying deep source. Six, the distribution of hydrocarbon deposits related to underlying mantle structures. Seventh, the distribution of metals and other trace elements of petroleum, which correlate more strongly with chondrite compositions than presumed process sources. And eight, the occurrence of hydrocarbons in non-sedimentary formations, such as crystalline rocks. Clearly, looking at both the abiotic and biotic theories of the creation of oil, we can see which one is scientific and which one is not based on facts. If there are no further questions, I will retire and allow my partner, Jacob Shaw, to stand and present the second point of error. We pray that you vote for the petitioner in this case.
May it please the court, Your Honor. I, Jacob Shaw, will now speak on the second point of error. If we know that oil is not biotic in composition and is therefore not finite, why are we still believing in the biotic formation of oil? Please cross-apply all my partner's points, and I'd like to begin with a brief review of how we got into this subject. The history of petroleum science had begun in 1757 when the Russian person of natural gifts, M. Lomonosov, suggested the hypothesis that oil might originate from biological detritus. During the end of the 19th century, the famous Russian chemist Dmitry Mendeleev stated clearly that oil is a primordial native material from great depth, mantle. The modern Russo-Ukrainian theory of deep, abiotic petroleum origins is not new or recent. This theory was first enunciated by Professor Nikolai Kurdeytsev in 1951, almost half a century ago, and has undergone extensive development, refinement, and application since its introduction. There have been more than 4,000 articles published in the Soviet scientific journals and many books dealing with the modern theory. This writer is presently co-authoring a book upon the subject of development of the application of modern theory for petroleum, of which the bibliography requires more than 30 pages. The modern Russo-Ukrainian theory of deep abiotic petroleum origins is not the work of any one single man, nor of a few men. The modern theory was developed by hundreds of scientists in now former USSR, including many defined as geologists, geochemists, geophysicists, and thermodynamicists of that country. There have now been more than 2 generations of geologists, geochemists, geophysicists, and other scientists in the USSR worked upon and contributed to the development of the modern theory. The modern Russo-Ukrainian theory of deep abiotic petroleum origins is not untested or speculative. On the contrary, the modern theory was severely challenged by many traditionally minded geologists at the time of its introduction and during the first decade thereafter. The modern theory was thoroughly examined, extensively reviewed, powerfully debated, and rigorously tested. Every year following 1951, there were important scientific conferences organized in the USSR to debate and evaluate the modern theory, its development, and its predictions. The ongoing conferences in petroleum geology in the years 1952 to 65 deal particularly with this subject. During the period when the modern theory is being subjected to extensive critical challenge and testing, a number of men pointed out that there had never been any similar critical review or testing of the traditional hypothesis that petroleum might somehow have evolved spontaneously from biological detritus. The modern Russo-Ukrainian theory of deep abiotic petroleum origins is not a vague qualitative hypothesis, but since it's a rigorous analytic theory within the mainstream of modern physical sciences. In this respect, the modern theory differs fundamentally not only from the geological hypothesis of the biological origin of petroleum, but also from all traditional geological hypotheses. Since the 19th century, notable physicists, chemists, thermodynamicists, and chemical engineers are regarded with grave reservations, if not outright disdain, a suggestion that highly reduced hydrocarbon molecules of high free enthalpy, the constituents of crude oil, might somehow evolve spontaneously from highly oxidized biogenic molecules of low free enthalpy. Beginning in 1964, Soviet scientists carried out extensive theoretical statistical thermodynamic analysis, which established explicitly that the hypothesis of evolution of hydrocarbon molecules, except methane, from biogenic ones in temperature and pressure regime of the Earth's near surface crust, was glaringly in violation of the second law of thermodynamics. They also determined that the evolution of reduced hydrocarbon molecules requires pressures of magnitudes and character depths equal to such a the mantle of the Earth. During the second phase of its development, the modern theory of petroleum was entirely cast from a qualitative argument based upon a synthesis of many qualitative facts into a quantitative argument based upon analytical arguments of quantum statistical mechanics and thermodynamic stability theory. With the transformation of the modern theory from a synthetic geology theory, arguing by persuasion, and an analytical physical theory, arguing by compulsion, petroleum geology entered the mainstream of modern science. The modern Russo-Ukrainian theory of deep abiotic petroleum origins is not controversial nor presently a matter of academic debate. The period debate about this extensive body of knowledge has been over approximately 2 decades. The modern theory is presently applied extensively throughout the former USSR as a guiding perspective for petroleum exploration and development projects. There are presently more than 80 oil and gas fields in the Caspian district alone, which were explored and developed by applying the perspective of the modern theory was produced from the crystalline basement rock. Similarly, such exploration in Western Siberian Crotonic sedimentary basin had developed 90 petroleum fields, which 80 produced either partly or entirely from the crystalline basement. The exploration discoveries of 11 major and 1 giant gas fields on the northern flank of the Dnipro basin have already been noted. There are presently deep drilling exploration projects underway in Azbersin, Tatarstan, and in Siberia, directed to testing potential oil and gas reservoirs in the crystalline basement. It appears that, unbeknownst to Westerners, there have been for quite some time now 2 competing theories concerning the origins of petroleum. One theory claims that oil is an organic fossil fuel deposited in finite quantities near the planet's surface. The other theory claims that oil is continuously generated by natural processes in the Earth's magma. One theory is backed by a massive body of research representing 50 years of intense scientific inquiry. The other theory is an unproven relic of the 18th century. One theory anticipates deep oil reserves, refillable oil fields, migratory oil systems, deep sources of generation, and the spontaneous venting of gas and oil. The other theory has a difficult time explaining any such documented phenomena. So which theory have we in the West, in our infinite wisdom, chosen to embrace? Why, the fundamentally absurd fossil fuel theory, of course, the same theory the peak oil and doomsday warnings are based upon. I'm sorry to report here, by the way, that in doing my homework, I never did come across any of that hard science documenting peak oil that Mr. Trawl referred to. All the peak oil literature that I found on Rupert site and elsewhere took for granted that petroleum is a non-renewable fossil fuel. That theory is never questioned, nor is any effort made to validate it. It is simply taken to be an established fact, which is quite obviously is not. First, look at the abiotic hydrocarbons in space. Carbon is the fourth most abundant element in the cosmos, and remote observations indicate the universe is replete with organic compounds produced without the influence of biology. The detailed absorption spectra of this molecular class revealed more than 150 small molecules. The greatest amounts of hydrocarbons in our solar system are associated with the gas giant planets and their satellites, where significant amounts are present in atmospheres and on icy surfaces. The prevalence of non-biological carbonaceous meteorites, which represent fragments of ancient asteroids, unchanged since shortly after the birth of our solar system. Carbonaceous meteorites contain persistent levels of organic matter that were generated in the absence of biology. The widespread presence of organic matter in the cosmos suggests that no exotic mechanism therefore need be invoked to propose abiogenetic hydrocarbons on Earth. In fact, the biogenic origin of some hydrocarbons on Earth is, thus far, a unique observation in an abiotic hydrocarbon-rich universe. In contrast to our cosmic environment, organic matter on Earth is associated primarily with biological processes. The distinction between biological and non-biological organic matter has a long-term fascination for scientists and philosophers. For instance, all ancient mythologies invoke divine intervention and the use of some abstract vital force for the production of organic matter that constitute life. Following the 7th centuries BC, such vitalist theories were often challenged by more materialistic concepts that assume only differences in levels of organization between living and non-living entities. A key moment for materialism came in 1828 when Friedrich Wöhler produced organic chemical urea, for inorganic ammonium cyanate, using a procedure now called the Wöhler synthesis. The generation of an organic compound for inorganic material affects the ability of non-biological processes to produce organic materials, and is an unavoidable conclusion that the origin of life on Earth was by definition the process of abiotic organic synthesis. In general, organic compounds generated by abiotic reactions, such as those that produce meteoritic organic matter, are characterized by complete structural diversity. Biological organic compounds produced by synthetic reactions directed by enzymes are notably specific in structure. Organic compounds of petroleum, by contrast, contain numerous structures and abundances that cannot be produced by the random polymerization from methane. Second, experimental hydrocarbon synthesis. Hydrocarbon synthesis is achievable under laboratory conditions and in shallow geological environments, and several key reactions are notable. First, the Fischer-Tropsch synthesis involves conversion of carbon monoxide or carbon dioxide to hydrocarbons. The products of the Fischer-Tropsch synthesis are low molecular weight hydrocarbons and often form a exclusive Fourier distribution, where the log of the hydrocarbon concentration occurs linearly with increasing carbon numbers. The Fischer-Tropsch process has been proposed as a generator of hydrocarbons in hydrothermal vent settings. Second, simple thermal metamorphism of carbonates such as calcite, dolomite, and siderite at 400 degrees Celsius in the presence of hydrogen gas can produce low molecular weight hydrocarbons. Third, thermal metamorphism of carbonates and graphite below 300 to 400 degrees Celsius and generate methane. And fourth, methane is common in midstream where desertionization reactions are implicated. Hydrogen forms during the degradation of olivine and can combine with carbon dioxide to form methane. In addition, for these reactions to proceed under conditions relevant to Earth's near surface, the influence of pressure may be an important factor for synthesis. This environmental control is especially pertinent to the theories of deep gas, and a number of experimental studies at elevated temperatures and pressures, while its deep crust and mantle conditions point to the possibility of deep abiotic hydrocarbon synthesis. First, the generation of petroleum hydrocarbons up to C10H22 was demonstrated using solid oxide, marble, and water temperatures of 1500 degrees Celsius and pressures of about 3 gigapascals, corresponding to a depth of more than 100 kilometers. Second, a heated diamond anvil cell has been employed to explore the calcite ion oxide water system at mental pressures and temperatures. Based on Raman spectroscopic and X-ray diffraction evidence, methane and possibly other light hydrocarbon species were successfully synthesized. The experiments represent the first attempts to test the Russian-Ukrainian school hypothesis under conditions comparable to those found in the mantle. Subsequent experimentation has successfully repeated the observations. Third, pressures above 2 gigapascals and temperatures from 1000 to 1500 Kelvin appear to induce polymerization of methane to hydrocarbons, molecular hydrogen, and graphite. Reactions are reversible under these conditions. Although elegant and efficient reactions exist, they can produce substantial amounts of hydrocarbons from simple precursors in the absence of biology. Care must be taken when extrapolating data to natural settings. Convincing evidence must be found the production mechanism is contributing. Lessons can be learned from meteoritic organic matter studies where the attractive physiotosynthesis mechanism was supporting, even though ample evidence was available to this reaction, was not contributing quantitatively significant amounts of material to organic inorganic inventory. Third, hydrocarbons and minerals. Evidence has been presented for organic protomolecule assembly in igneous rocks. According to Froom's hypothesis, igneous most inevitably incorporate carbon and other impurities at high temperatures. As minerals crystallize, they also incorporate a small amount of hydrocarbon, which constitutes along linear crystal defects and form alkanes. However, these results have been challenged by other workers. Fourth, abiotic hydrocarbons from hydrothermal events. A number of authors have presented experimental, theoretical, and field evidence for the possible release of abiotic hydrocarbon species from hydrothermal events. Hydrocarbons have been collected from numerous field sites. Observations of gas chemistry, abundance, and fluxes in various vent settings have provided an opportunity to assess quantitatively the relevance of a proposed abiotic species to commercial oil and gas resources. Mean values of molar CH43 helium and none-derived fluids imply that less than 200 ppm of abiotic gas are present in economically resident reservoirs. These field observations of hydrocarbons from hydrothermal systems have been complemented by experimental studies that attempt to replicate natural conditions. A number of these experiments have been demonstrated abiotic formation of methane and other organic compounds, particularly in studies that mimic serpentinization. The experiments underscore the importance of traditional elements and the optimal synthesis of organic molecules and Fischer-Tropsch reactions. These results suggest an intriguing connection between mineral-mediated organic synthesis and biological catalysts, many of which incorporate traditional mineral atoms at their active sites. Biochemical reactions, predominantly by enzymes that incorporate traditional metals, may thus represent reactive pathways and have survived and evolved in the prebiotic geochemical world. Constituted a main argument put forward by Western biotic oil theorists is that biomarkers are always found to exist organic detritus within all oil deposits, which is certainly true. But unfortunately, oil exists inside the earth and is surrounded by different types of geological soils, which all contain organic detritus, and is a wonderful solvent when which is dissolved and holds detritus. Also, and by the reverse argument, alkanes, kerogens, and many other petroleum-related chemicals have been found in meteorites, which support no organic life. Caused by the fact that no fossils have been found below 15,000 feet, your oil is being currently drilled up to 40,000 feet. But let's put a controversy. Why are we not told the truth? 7 reasons why we're not told the truth about the sources of oil. First, in his paper, The Abiotic Oil Controversy by Richard Heimberg, which decides with biogenic oil, with relatively little actual quoted research evidence, has even admitted there is no way to conclusively prove that no petroleum is of abiotic origin. Perhaps one day, there will be general agreement that at least some oil is indeed abiotic. Maybe there are indeed methane belts 20 miles below the Earth's surface. But the important question to keep in mind is, what are the practical consequences of this discussion now for the global problem of global oil depletion? Constituted a fact, so you can't prove that it isn't. Constituted maybe, although by doing this, the biotic oil theories are really tearing down their own theory. Constituted the real problem for the biotic oil theories is not how oil is created, but that it is running out. This is a logical fallacy, the creation of a false dilemma. How can you run out of a product that is unlimited? Second, American geologist Kingham Hubbard predicted in 1956 that peak oil for the USA will peak in 1970. However, in December 2014, the United States once again released a well in the production of oil, actually producing more oil than it did in 1970. Caused by the fact that the oil price from August 2014 to December 2014 fell below 50%. If Hubbard's theory of peak oil were correct, neither of these two facts would have taken place. Clearly, peak oil and the price of oil are trying to manipulate the demand of oil by creating a false sense of running out of oil. With limited supply, demand and prices go up. Caused by the fact that supply has gone up, prices have gone down, causing the best predicted peak oil as a theory is completely dead. Third, caused by the fact that the laws of thermodynamics prohibit spontaneous evolution of liquid hydrocarbons in a regime of temperature and pressure characteristic of the crust of the earth, one should not expect there to exist legitimate scientific evidence that might suggest that such could occur. Caused by there exists no such evidence. Nonetheless, and surprisingly, there continue to be often promulgated diverse claims purporting to constitute evidence that natural petroleum somehow evolves miraculously from biological matter. Fourth, oil is often called a fossil fuel, the idea being it comes from former living organisms. This may have been plausible back when oil wells were drilled into the fossil layers of the Earth's crust. But today, great quantities of oil are found in deeper wells that are found below the level of any fossils. How could then oil come from fossils or decompose from living matter? If it exists in rock formations far below layers of fossils, the evidence of former living organisms. It must not come from living matter at all. 2 days after I read this statement, I encountered the following statement in a newspaper I deeply respect. Any geologist will tell you, well, most geologists will tell you, that oil is created by the magma of the earth. The oil wells in Pennsylvania that were pumped out dry at the turn of the century and capped are now filled with oil again. Say what? This response from Daniel E. Reynolds on July 29, 1996, on the subject of oil, a renewable and abiotic fuel. How about the only reason we're still being taught that oil is a fossil fuel is to control the price of oil and to aid the theory that we're running out of oil. Fifth, Academy of Sciences, Moscow. For almost a century, various predictions have been made that human race is imminently going to run out of available petroleum. The passing of time has proven all those predictions have been utterly wrong. Consequently, how all predictions have been dependent fundamentally upon an archaic hypothesis from the 18th century that petroleum somehow miraculously evolved from biological detritus and is accordingly limited in abundance. The hypothesis has been placed during the past 40 years by modern Russian-Ukrainian theory of deep abiotic petroleum origins, which is established that petroleum is a primordial material erupted from the Great Death. Therefore, petroleum abundances are limited by a little more than the quantities of its constituents as were incorporated into the earth at the time of its formation, and its availability depends upon technological development and exploration competence. Sixth, one of the most success stories of the practical application of the theory of the abyssal abiotic order of petroleum is exploration of the Dnipro basin in Ukraine. It's a cratonic-rich basin running in the northwest southern-east direction between 30.6 degrees east and 40.5 degrees east. Its northern and southern borders are traced from 50 degrees north to 51.8 degrees north and 47.8 degrees north to about 50 degrees north, respectively. In DB's northern monolithic flank, the sedimentary sequence does not contain any salt-bearing beds, salt domes, nor stratovolcanoes, and no source rocks. Also, this flank is categorized by a dense network of numerous synthetic and antithetic faults. These faults create the mosaic fault block structure, crystalline basement, and sedimentary overcover a large number of the fault traps, the fault anticlines for oil and natural gas, and alteration uplifts for horse and troughs or grabens. The structure of the DDB's northern flank excludes any lateral petroleum migration causes from either the Dnipro of the community dwellings full built or the DDB's Dnipro graben. Consequently, DDB's northern flank earlier was qualified as not prospective for petroleum production to the absence of any source rock of petroleum and the presence of an active halidamic artisan aquifer. However, after a while, the prospectivity of the area was reinterpreted, re-examined, and compliant with the theory of the abyssal or geologenic origin of petroleum, starting with the detailed analysis of the tectonic history and geological origin of petroleum, starting with the structure of the crystalline basement, DDB's northern monolithic flank. Subsequently, respective geologic, physical, and geochemical reproductive programs were expected primarily for exploring deep-sea petroleum. Late 1980s, early 1990s, 601 wells were drilled in the DDB's northern flank. 57 of them proved commercially productive. The exploration success rate is as high as 57%. And discovering commercial oil and gas strikes in Kuchur and Chechnya, Lubikia, and other areas. As well as 12 oil and gas fields discovered worth $4.38 billion in the prices of 1991 and $26.3 billion in prices of 2008. The discovery of these new oil and gas accumulations, various scientists in Ukraine were awarded the state prize of Ukraine in the field of science and technology in 1992. Today, there are 50 commercial and oil and gas fields known to DDB's northern flank. Data obtained from drilling in many of these areas show the crystalline basement in the northern flank consists of amphibolites, charnacites, diorites, genesis, granites, granodiorites, granitogenesis, migmatites, periodites, and schists. 32 commercial fields have oil or gas accumulation in sandstone of the mid-lower Carboniferous age. 16 other fields contain reservoirs in the same sandstone, specifically from them, and amphibolites, granites, and granodiorites of crystalline basement as well. 2 fields contain oil pools in the crystalline basement only. 7th, a Russian book, Advanced Drilling Solutions, detailing deep and ultra-deep drilling technology beyond the Earth's crust sedimentary layers to depths of over 4,000 feet. And it occurs in quantity in geological domains where oil is relatively little or absent, due to the full dust belts, and some large basins such as the West Siberia Salmon basins in depths below 15,000 feet. Natural gas has been found at 21,000 feet in the granitic rocks of Sweden's Siljan meteorite crater, and the deepest depths drilled in the earth in Oklahoma at 31,441 feet, and over 40,000 feet on the Koala Peninsula in Russia. It's peculiar there have been so little Western scientific peer reviews or acknowledgement or research verification concerning the ultra-deep Russian abiotic formation theory. Truly, this is suspicious and bears investigating, even if you don't believe the theory, because it would entirely remove the geopolitical effects and problems of the current thinking of oil that is running out. Concerning this theory, I've shown you why it is wrong. In the end, we have to agree to Russian abiotic theory of oil formation, backed up by all this evidence, is far more likely to be the true explanation. And there appears to be little or no conclusive evidence for the Western biotic theory of oil. But that in and of itself leaves much unanswered, doesn't it? For what reasons then? In light of these fact conclusions, is the peak oil theory being so heavily touted, a theory that is wholly dependent on the Western biotic theory of oil formation, which as I see it is a completely unproven theory. Are working geologists and scientists that super unfair, or is there an underlying hidden agenda and media steerage here by the big oil majors or OPEC, perhaps discreetly encourage higher oil prices through promotion of a false scarcity of this research by conveniently supporting the Western biotic theory of oil formation, now disproven defunct, to so heavily promote Hubert's peak oil theory? Follow the money. No one to gain from this taunting this theory are the oil companies themselves. They push oil to record heights and held the developed world hostage to no rims. Then in December 2014, a break from stranglehold they once held in OPEC on exporting of oil. This is because of a national greed and the fact the U.S. is now producing vast more sums of oil. Prices have dropped by more than 50% from June 2014 to December 2014. I leave you with this question and a prayer. Would oil actually lose 50% of its value if we're running out of it? And why is it the large oil companies that have never really invested heavily into other forms of energy? Is it because they know that my partner and I, that they do not have to, because they will never run out of oil? But Jerry 25 for the petitioners in this case, they vote for the promotion of the truth. Thank you for your time. And if there are no further questions, I will retire and turn the argument over to you.
Okay, Sisler, your turn.
Cool. So
We'll have questions when you're done.
Okay, so should we go right into speech and
Yeah.
notice? Okay, Parman, go ahead. Can you hear us okay?
Yeah, we hear you fine.
Great.
Good morning. Before I start with my speech, I'd just like to emphasize on a few points that the opposition made. This is not questions, these are just a few points I'd like to emphasize. The biogenic theory proposes, contrary to the other side's argument, that dinosaurs account for a very small percentage of fossil fuels. In fact, it is no larger than 5% according to National Geographic. In addition, most fossil fuel is composed of marine life and decayed bacterial organisms, as will be talked about later in my speech. Furthermore, the opposition talked about the big oil companies knowing that oil is abiotic. A conspiracy at such a scale is impossible to conceive, as there surely have to be a few leaks by a few geologists around the world. So this is not only preposterous, but also defies Occam's razor, which states that the easiest theory to believe is the simplest theory. As for the rest of the rebuttals, I will not be rebuttaling points, as my partner will be doing so. Today, the proposition would like to propose, or more specifically adhere to, the widely accepted theory that oil is a fossil fuel. A fossil fuel is defined as the following: a natural fuel composed of hydrocarbons in a specific structure that have been formed in the geological past from the remains of living organisms. To start off, we would like to explore some history of petroleum. Although the Greeks, Romans, and Egyptians did consume a small quantity of oil as well, their oil mostly came from animals and other plants, but it was not directly crude oil or bitumen. The first oil well, or the first proposed oil well in America, which eventually led to the buildup of the petroleum industry, began with Edward L. Drake when he drilled a successful oil well in Pennsylvania in 1859. Transporting the oil from the well was also a problem. In 1865, Samuel Van Sickle, an oil buyer, began construction on a 2-inch wide pipeline designed to span the distance to the railroad depot 5 miles away. Soon thereafter, John D. Rockefeller opened up some refineries as more oil was found in Pennsylvania, and he became one of the richest men in the world alive at that time. So why is this important, you may ask? Well, you see, when they dug an oil well in Pennsylvania, it was not luck, but based on Pennsylvania's rich geological history of being under a lake. And so they dug a hole around 50 feet in depth, and from there brought on one of the biggest revolutions in the world. Before we dwell deeper into the geology, at this time, let's consider the process of how oil is formed, according to the biogenic theory. It is our contention that oil is a fossil fuel formed during geological processes in combination with decomposition of biological matter. During the planet's long history, particularly marine life, when they died, their remains were buried under layers of sediment. Over millions of years, this organic material underwent chemical change due to the heat and pressure of being buried under layers of sediment, and eventually formed a very basic chemical compound known as kerogen. These kerogen molecules eventually crack and break down into their components of carbon and hydrogen atoms during a process referred to as ketogenesis. These hydrocarbons, the result of the ketogenesis process, are the precursors to either natural gas or petroleum. This process, as described, would require millions of years, and therefore oil or natural gas extracted from its results are finite. Finite due to the fact that they are the result of a finite amount of biological material that is decomposed, and finite in that we are expanding that material extracted at a faster and faster rate. In fact, the geophysicist M. King Hubert had suggested that the extraction of fossil fuels would reach a peak and then decline. That the extraction of oil would rise and decline based on the discovery of new oil wells. His model largely proved consistent throughout the 20th and 21st century. Moreover, as the theory of abiotic fuel has not proven commercially practical, let alone consistently evident as a scientific theory, the proposition of renewable oil has not altered his theory. Another point that must be stressed here is that oil form reserves through plate tectonics. Plate tectonic movements on a global scale result in layers of rock of varying permeability. That is, oil and gas can travel or not travel through these layers depending on the type of rock present. Normally, these layers of rock are pushed or pulled into each other through tectonic movement, which falsifies the opposition's points about oil being in different layers of the earth, because plate tectonics not only makes this a possibility, but more so a probability. Due to the varying density of the rock layers, usually forming reservoirs of different shapes and sizes. A point to remember here is oil and gas is lighter than water, so will always try to float, even though it is in rock. Subsequently, different types of reservoirs with different ages of oil contained within them can be formed. Obviously, the top layer of rock, the seabed, is impermeable, so oil and gas cannot escape. This layer is called the caprock. Several types of reservoirs exist and are categorized according to the rock surrounding them. Finding them requires acoustic signals sent out by towing a buoy behind a boat and firing signals to identify in a 3D image what the seabed looks like. Sometimes oil companies manage to see what's beneath the seabed also and into the substrata. But generally the principle is the same, acoustic sounding. When the seabed formation is identified, geologists identify potential targets to drill depending on whether it looks like oil, gas could have migrated there through the rock and became trapped, ready for extraction. Recent methods involved using acoustic signals where previously there had been a lake, because oil is most likely found where there is decomposition of biological material. So, our main points upon which I would like to briefly just touch upon include success in commercial development of oil according to adhering to the biogenic theory. Companies still, to this day, drill only where they know there might have been some form of lake or biological decomposition. They do not drill anywhere at random, or anywhere where plate tectonics may suggest that oil may seep through. In addition, the presence of some kerogen in fossil fuels goes against the abiotic theory, because if oil did seep through the surface by centripetal acceleration, as proposed by Thomas Gold, it would not contain kerogen, as kerogen and the rest of the oil have varying densities. I would also like to, again, mention Ottman's razor, because Ottman's razor suggests that the easiest theory to believe is the simplest theory and the most correct theory. An example here, of course, would be considering something that we haven't yet been able to explore because of technological limits, such as time travel. Although there are many theories about time travel, time being a loop, going back in time, forward in time, Einstein's second postulate suggests that time and space are in a continuum, and therefore that is the most believable theory, because it is the easiest theory to believe in, which makes it the most correct at this point. I would also like to mention the expensive production costs of the abiogenic theory would not make it commercially viable. And also the instability of the Earth drilling to such depths would result in disastrous results. And one more thing I would like to mention is that this is a part of energy debate. And even if even if we were able to find oil at such depths, according to the abiogenic theory, it would not be sustainable. At this point, I would like to hand off the stage to my partner.
So I believe we can ask questions, or do.
Here, let me, oh, we're on, yeah. Hey, yeah.
Do we ask questions? Yeah. Or can I just go?
Go for December.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So I will be rebuttaling the opposition's points. I have one question that was constantly repeated throughout the speech of the opposition. It was that the second law of thermodynamics was broken. But my question is, how is the second law of thermodynamics broken in the biogenic theory?
Could you repeat that one more time, please? Sorry about that.
The second law of thermodynamics was very often cited in your speech, but my question is, how was the second law of thermodynamics? What is the second law of thermodynamics, please? And how was it broken by the biogenic theory?
So I don't have the direct definition of the second law of thermodynamics here for as a resource. However, when looking at the application of the biogenic theory and falling under the second law of thermodynamics, it can't sustain itself by applying the instances of where there's more pressure in the earth, that being in the interior, within the mantle, as opposed to the outside on the crust externally. If there is more pressure on the outside of the earth, there will cause an implosion. Therefore, there must be greater pressure inside the depths of the mantle, implying that oil would have to be formed in deeper depths because there's more pressure there, because there's a deeper pressure regime there. Looking at that in the opposite way indicates that the second law of thermodynamics will be broken.
I have the second law of thermodynamics right here. It states that in a natural thermodynamic process, there is an increase in the sum of the entropies of the participating systems. Entropy is pretty much the energy of a system getting smaller and smaller, and eventually leading to the demise of the universe. I just don't see how pressure, which doesn't really relate to work or energy in a physical sense. There's no direct relation between pressure and energy. How does this apply?
Sorry, so let me clarify. So when looking at amount of work energy, certainly at greater depths, there's more of it because there's more pressure applied, because there's a tighter sense of work going on. You're gonna have a greater concentration of energy and a greater concentration of oil that is seemingly being constituted because of all that pressure. Those are the types of conditions which oil is going to be formed. When looking at enthalpy and work, and if it were to be opposite, if greater pressure was happening at the outside, in the crust, where the biologic theory of oil attests that oil is being found at, even by oil companies, if we're opposite, and oil and work were to be applied to theory of thermodynamics at that point, and therefore cause an implosion of the earth, because it would be suggesting that there's greater amounts of work being done on the outside. There's greater amounts of energy being applied on the outside at the crust. And if that's actually true, and there's greater amounts of pressure, greater amounts of energy and work on the outside as opposed to the inside, there would have to eventually be an implosion of the earth, because you'll be compromising the whole structural integrity of the earth. However, it's the exact opposite. We know that much more pressure, more energy and work are being done in the inside of the earth, within the mantle, which actually where oil is being produced as its primordial within the earth. Because of that, we see that oil is infinite and it's always going to be continuously being generated because it's that deep inside the earth, because it's a naturally occurring process.
I will just finish off with this point. The compressibility of liquids is actually quite slight. So when there's a pressure exerted on them, they do contract and they do exert an outward force. That's the third law of Newton's motion, that when there is a force applied onto an object, it will resist with an equal force. And since pressure is applied equally all around, say, a cavern full of oil or something like that, then it's compressed a little bit, but it also reaches a point where the forces acting on the opposite sides are equal and balanced. So that sort of takes care of that point. There's also a very stressed in your first speech that that oil comes from a time where there were dinosaurs, and every barrel of oil is created from dinosaurs, and millions of dinosaurs must have died at once to create this oil. Actually, all research says that it comes from, as well as from the time of dinosaurs, but most of oil comes from before dinosaurs' time. Oil is defined as made from past biotic life. So that includes anything from swamps to trees to plants to worms to whatever. Of course, there were not those life forms were not all present before the dinosaur age. But anything that was living and made up of higher hydrocarbons was died, compressed, and under sediments and under pressure, and the heat coming from the center of the earth changed into higher hydrocarbons such as oil or gas or coal. Also, your partner said that it is impossible for, if you have oil in the bottom, he used the soup analogy. If there's oil in the bottom and there's oil higher and they're somehow the same age, how is this possible? You can't do that. That is assuming that geology is uniform everywhere and anywhere. If you have, say, a bunch of oil very deep that is under a plane that takes millions of years or thousands of years to get higher and develop that pressure to convert to higher hydrocarbons, and you have a cavern of oil that is under a mountain, that there is an earthquake and a mountain arises, and this pressure increases drastically really quickly, then that can make oil that is the same age in two different places at various different heights. Geology is not very simple. It's not just a soup cooking on a dinner table. It is highly complex with many different factors and variables in it that you cannot just predict by age and height alone. There is so much more that you have to consider. There's also a strong emphasis on the books and quotes of various scientists. This does not matter at all, nor does it prove the proof of the abiotic theory, nor does the amount of time that the biotic theory has been around prove anything. you mentioned that there are many organic hydrocarbons in space, and that must prove that the abiotic theory is true. Actually, the hydrocarbons that exist in space are the simplest hydrocarbons, such as methane, which is CH4. While many abiotic theorists point to this as proof that there are organisms or enzymes that catalyze inorganic hydrocarbons into organic hydrocarbons, this is a common fallacy because methane, which is, like I mentioned, the simplest hydrocarbon and the most abundant hydrocarbon in space and in atmospheres and in gaseous planets, can be converted in just low temperatures and pressures. That does not mean that it can go on to create oil or gas or anything else, because that is a much more complex and requires many more different variables to be correct for that. So just because methane or very simple hydrocarbons exist in space, this does not mean that that molecules or enzymes are the reason for this. Like my partner mentioned, you mentioned that big oil companies have been hiding the truth from the public because they want to raise prices and have a financial gain from this. That is a direct violation of Occam's razor, which would mean that the abiotic theory requires thousands and thousands of people from all over the world to be keeping this secret. No scientist to find this a proof of this abiotic oil and publish it, and that's Occam's razor states that the argument that has the least assumptions is the correct one. So it is obviously not easier, but more correct to believe in the biotic theory, where oil is a fossil fuel and it will run out someday. Whereas the theory that is biotic and that it's not ever going to run out, but everybody is pushing the idea that it is going to run out, and that we all have to run around worrying about it, just because some people want to make money off of it. That's obviously a fallacy. It's also a fallacy where it's an appeal to consequence. This is when you argue that a proposition is true because the belief in it will have good consequences. Just as just because a plant is capable of making its own ideal, it doesn't mean that it is possible. You're stating that it would be nice if the planet would create its own fuel, because then we would go on for a long time without having to worry about oil running out. As you mentioned, our 700,000 of raw products use raw oil for their creation. So even though you do want that to be true, it is unfortunately not. I have during your speeches, you had a lot of your theory of abiotic oil, and I do stress the word theory, as it is not proven, nor is it proof capable of proof at all. While it is pretty, I did not hear many proofs. Well, my question to you is, do you have any specific examples of when abiotic oil was found? Because I can say that I believe there's a leprechaun under my bed, but if I never look, well, then, and I never pull one out, well, then how is that possible? I can say anything and have a lot of theories, but I don't have a lot of proof.
So that was a question, correct? You're asking me?
Yes, yeah. Do you have any proof about abiotic fuel?
Yes, in fact, we have decades of proof. So the whole premise of our argument and going over the background and history and the foundation of the abiotic theory was, in fact, the Russian-Ukrainian model that was purported first by M. Lomonosov and then by the Russian First Natural Gifts Mendeleev. So we're looking at their decades of research that they've had through extensive development and refinement over each year, where they held all union conferences and had a critical testing and review of the abiotic theory of oil that pushed them through the Cold War. In fact, first getting their first amounts of information from Nazi Germany during World War II. That's where the first implications came from. But following with the whole Russian idea model and looking at their research that they've done for, again, decades and decades, which actually does have within our system today, within the Earth today. If you multiply and look at former theories, such as looking at Hubert's peak oil theory, it can't sustain itself because the implications of peak oil there being that someday will run out, it would have already happened again. Looking at Pennsylvania, for example, well, as I said with Richard Heimberg, who stated that Haley's oil is now abiotic in nature because Pennsylvania was capped at the turn of the century. Oil is now producing once again. Looking at the U.S. as a whole, the price of oil and gas dropped by 50% from August of last year all the way through December. If the peak oil theory is correct, this implication, in fact, couldn't be true because it'd be impossible to have. Therefore, looking at the Russia-Ukrainian model, it's the only sustainable model and the most plausible model. It's actually, if we want to apply Occam's razor, we actually see it as being simpler in belief, because believing that oil is primordial originating in the depths of the earth is the most factual, clearly proven, and easiest foundation or originator for the process of oil being made or for oil's constitution in general. Looking at it from a fossil fuel theory has too many holes in it, as my partner as I have presented, and doesn't explain such instances of why oil can be found at greater depths below where it is currently being drilled at, and why it can fall in price over 50% in the United States, for example, and why the United States can be a leading producer of oil again when we were told in the 70s, for example, that we were going to be running out of oil by 2000.
This is I'm asking, do you have a barrel of abiotic oil that you can point to and say, well, this is abiotic oil? Because, like I mentioned, you can say a lot of different things, but unless you have proof that you have this.
Again, every barrel, I guess I'm not thinking every barrel, but every barrel of oil that Russia's produced since 1952, particularly the USSR, would count as abiotic oil. Yes. I don't have I don't have a barrel of USSR oil or Russian abiotic oil in front of me, no. But I could go to Russia and get you one if that's what you're asking.
Okay, so turning to Russia, the proponents of abiotic oil like to point out that although Russia's oil production peaked in 1987, their output has increased tremendously over the past several years, like you mentioned. They link this to the Russian development of the abiotic oil hypothesis, which is held by a small minority of Russian scientists who claims Russia's production is growing because of abiotic oil. In the first place, Russian oil production dropped precipitously in the early 1990s following the collapse of the Soviet Union. The current surge in oil is in part due to the revival of the Russian oil industry. Oil is just about the only thing currently holding up the Russian economy. They're overproducing their oil fields, and as we have said numerous times, this overproduction will catch up with them. Russian discovery peaked in 1960 and has since diminished to almost nothing. Colin Campbell's model suggests that a secondary peak around 2010, followed by another steep decline due to overproduction. However, it now appears that the Russian production is approaching its second peak. The Moscow News has reported that Yuri Shafarnik, the head of the Russian Union of Oil and Gas Producers, stated on November 9th that 2004 that Russia has almost reached its maximum production and will decline within 2 years. 2014. Mr. Shafarnik referred to the experts from the International Energy Agency. Moscow News has also reported that the Russian oil producers will have to cut back on drilling. Production drilling fell by 3.4% in the first 9 months of 2014, while exploration drilling fell by 20.6%. Such a large drop in exploratory drilling could indicate that investors see a trend of diminishing returns from further exploration. So after that, how can you say that Russia was supposed to peak in 2000 and they are just experiencing a boom in oil all the time, when it's clear that they are overproducing their oil fields, and from that they are getting a larger yield, but they're crashing considerably, especially with investors dropping by 20% and 3.4%. Those are huge, especially since Russia's an economy in very many ways based solely upon oil and energy production. So something like 20% drop in exploratory drilling, that's huge. As quite a large percentage to fall by. And if this abiotic theory were true, then why should they stop drilling and start losing money?
So, sorry, first, I'm seeing there was confusion here, but I was referring to, for example, 1970s, we were told that we were going to be running out of oil by 2000. I wasn't specifically referring to Russia or USSR. I was, in fact, referring to United States. When, for example, our debate coach was in high school, and that's what he was told about the United States. We were running out of oil. However, again, we're the leaders of oil now again. Turning to the side of Russia, looking at their peak oil, yes, oil goes through cycles of boom and bust. Prices are always going to be fluctuating as we see. However, what we do comprehend by the Russian-Ukrainian model that sustained them throughout from the 50s to the 60s and throughout to the early 90s is that when USSR was broken and they stopped such processes they had been formerly doing to produce oil, that's when you saw a complete decline in their oil production. By again leading in oil production within Russia and mapping things again, we see that again turning to their old methods actually is a tried and true thing, is actually proves that they can again use the abiotic theory to actually form oil and to actually continue their processes of being a big producer of oil, to not having to fall to any other particular forms or major forms of energy. It's the same critical reason why OPEC and big oil companies for themselves, they don't have to look to other sources of energy, particularly as a major source. They can just continue to turn to oil. But again, I would turn to the various books and various all-union conferences that occurred from for decades, from 52 to the early 90s, that dealt particularly with this subject, that oil is in fact abiotic. They held a single conference each year to discuss over oil's abiotic nature in the USSR, and in fact proved that they could produce vast sums of oil by doing abiotic types of work and types of formation and types of theories and following types of experiments. However, the reason why in the West, for example, it's so hard for us to comprehend and so hard for us to actually get under this backing is one, well, none of the documentation or most documentation isn't translated. It's not in English, so therefore we haven't comprehended. Second, when looking at those times of periods, when looking at the Cold War, especially between the United States and Russia, well, anything Russia and the United States was seen as anti-American and unpatriotic, so we weren't going to turn to the Russian forms of certainly producing oil, how they were helping themselves. And third, another critical reason, and because, again, oil companies that are big in the United States, Rockefeller, for example, producing a conference himself and calling the fact and purporting the fact and having all of his own scientists paying devices basically, and saying that oil has to be biotic in nature, is stating in our own country that to hold the masses, or anybody in the West, for example, for that matter, even in your country, to hold the oil is in fact biotic, they can charge whatever they want. But as we've seen last year, especially with the 50% price drop in oil, if oil was in fact biotic in composition in nature, it will be impossible for that to happen. As we'll see, as oil will drop again and again, and will keep dropping throughout our time period, and because we'll keep producing oil more and more again, and because we'll become, again, a large producer of oil again, in contradiction to what scientists were saying in the 1970s, that we would actually run out of oil by 2000, for example, we'll see the oil must be, in fact, abiotic in composition. That will be the only true theory of how we can produce such large sums and continue to produce such large sums, and why a price can drop in 50% in a matter of a few months for oil.
Do you have any questions for us?
Yes, we do. So with the first question, with the implication that oil is in fact a fossil fuel, meaning that it comes from fossils, how do you explain the fact that in Oklahoma, for example, when oil is drilled at 31,441 feet is found, or the Kola Peninsula in Russia, where oil is drilled for less than more than 40,000 feet, but fossils are only found at 16,000 feet. We never found a fossil below 16,000 feet. How do you explain oil being found at depths?
So this is possible because of, as I mentioned, the complicated geography and geology of the world. For example, in offshore Vietnam, abiotic theorists like to point at the oil fields there where they drill into granite and they have oil. However, this is because, in this specific example, is because due to the very, very complicated tectonic and geologic events that occurred there, the sedimentary rock with all the oil and everything was shifted underneath granite, and that's how they get this oil. So just like you're in your question, where the varying different depths, there's adjacent sedimentary layers that move very differently in very different directions. So I mean, you cannot just expect oil to be found at one specific level consistently throughout the entire Earth, because that would be saying that the entire Earth is completely flat or completely round with no bumps or ridges or mountains or valleys in it, or plate tectonics at all.
Our implication is that oil is uniform, it's going to be found in a uniform place. What we're saying is the implication that oil is in fact a fossil fuel. How can that be sustained with the facts we've cast that oil is being found at 31,000 feet in Oklahoma, for example, or 4,000 feet, and the Holy Peninsula in Russia, for example. However, when oil is being proposed as a fossil fuel and coming from fossils, that it's never been found below, fossils never been found below 16,000 feet. How can that specifically be explained? Regardless of varying depths, we're not saying that 16,000 feet is a cutoff. We're saying this fossil never been found below that depth in the world. So then how can then oil be still considered a fossil fuel, or can we still say it's from fossil when being found at depths greater in the world? Clearly that doesn't make any kind of sense. The abiotic theory can explain this.
Again, I'd like to refer back to the offshore Vietnam drillings. In offshore Vietnam, oil was found below the fossil line, except the source rock for the hydrocarbons or the oil is an algal-rich Liquistean rock which matured during the Oligocene, Miocene, pull-apart basin, and subsequent burial phases. So these hydrocarbons are not biotic. They originate from the Liquistean sedimentary rock, even though they are found under the fossil line.
But not all oils not all areas are being drilled that have these types of rocks or have these types of sources, correct?
That's up for debate because, like I mentioned, the geologic composition of the Earth is very complex. It can't be just defined. I would argue that every place in the world has some sort of specific variable that makes it different than every other place. Well, what we're trying to say is that using the Vietnam example, the oil is definitely, just because fossils are found higher and oil is found lower, there's the levels in the rock, the tectonic plates, the geology moves in different places. So over the thousands of years that the sedimentary rock has been there and has been compressing into oil, it's moved down. And that's entirely possible. You're saying that oil has been found below the fossil line. Well, that's entirely possible due to the geology of the Earth and how the way the Earth moves and the way the tectonic plates move. So that's entirely possible. It's your question is quite simple. We've been trying to answer it in a way. Does that answer your question?
Yes. So what I'm getting from this is that you're saying that it's explained by tectonic plates, and we're saying it is explained by the primordial nature of oil being found in the Earth. We're saying it is generated primordially by the Earth, and you're in fact saying that it's due to the tectonic plate shifts, if I'm understanding correctly.
Yeah, yes, sure.
So the next question I would have for you, when discussing Kingdom Hubbard's and his peak oil theory and its decline, for example, again, I'm turning to my debate coach who he said in the 1970s when he was going to school, they were telling him, many times were telling him, and his teachers were telling him, for example, that United States or Texas will run out of oil by 2000, year 2000. As we've seen now in 2014, price of oil is dropping significantly. We're a large producer of oil in the United States. How can this be explained if we were told we were running out of oil by the year 2000 or sooner? How can this be explained by King Hubbard's peak oil theory as well as the biotic oil theory as a whole?
Well, it's quite simple. I mean, when you're dealing with such an object like oil, which is very deep and very hard to estimate, especially when the technology a couple of years ago was definitely not what it is right now, it's hard to estimate when oil will run out. But it's quite clear that really the estimates were wrong, and it's, as we're seeing right now in Russia, for 100%, the oil is declining now. So while it might have been, we might have been, according to your source, running out by 2000, we're beginning to run out right now with a beautiful example in Russia. Shale oil in Canada with new technology has developed new oil. So deep oil drilling has been, from that time, brought up. So all these new ways of extracting oil, because oil has been running out on land, has become more and more popular. And I mean, we'll extend the life of oil as much as we can. How we'll try to get every last drop, but eventually there will be no last drop to get. So while the estimates may be that they may be changing, they may add another 10 years or something because a new way of extracting oil is found. Well, that is just extending. It's sort of like trying to pull up a guy that's already dying and trying to stand him on his feet. You know, you'll help him for a while, but it's just gonna end up not well later on. You're on mute. You're on mute.
Oh, sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yeah. Sorry about that.
Yeah, I had a follow-up question. It was kind of a two-part, and I think after that we'll have to be getting going. The follow-up question is as follows. So when discussing, you stated that the estimates were wrong. In fact, they've been wrong for decades of when oil was actually going to run out for us. So when applying that, wouldn't that implicate that the theory is actually wrong in and of itself? If all the estimates of the theory have been found to be fundamentally wrong, generation after generation, whether it be on the base coast generation or whether it be our generation in itself. And second, since a lot of your case was about foundation of Achman's razor and falling under the simplest theory having to be the correct one, if all these estimates are continually being wrong, they're continually examining and being only wrong again, isn't that more complicated than just believing that oil is unlimited, and that's why year after year the estimates about biotic theory have been wrong, and in fact why we continually see that oil is vast sums of oil are continually being found again and again, instead of we're seeing a decline, we're seeing a vast upbringing, if you will.
You're on.
So what you're saying is that the peak oil theory defies what we're trying to prove? Is that what you're trying to state? You're on mute again. I'm sorry.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
So what we were stating was that, as your partner said, the estimates by the peak oil theory and theorists have been wrong. Well, then it's been wrong. They've been continually wrong for generation after generation, decade after decade. What we're saying is that because of that, that in of itself will prove that the theory is wrong in itself, because the theory hasn't necessarily ever been right. The estimates have always been wrong. But further, looking at Achman's razor, if you want to apply that for the simplest theory being correct, isn't it simplest to believe, in fact, by applying your own logic, that oil is unlimited, and therefore that's why the estimates have always been wrong, because they've never been able to comprehend or explain why, for example, the United States is the leading producer of oil again when it was at the lowest and was thought to become peaked and capped again. But for example, looking at Pennsylvania again, it just have been refilled somehow, we believe, ebiotically. We're just asking how, wouldn't that first, that's what disprove the theory? And second, isn't it simply to believe in Achman's razor that oil was unlimited?
Yeah, so your Pennsylvania example of how oil is being refilled, or in Russia, there's been something that's been brought up as an example of abiotic theory as well. It's just a simple repressurization of oil, and as you mentioned, that there's higher pressures underground. So once you take out a certain bunch of that oil, you have lower pressures, which stop the oil from coming up the pipe that pumps it out of the ground. Because if you do not have an adequate pressure, you cannot take the oil down. So if there's just a repressurization of the collapsing cavern due to the high pressures. So once the oil is capped, the pressure collapses and makes the cavern smaller, increasing the pressure. And when decades later someone opens it up, they find a little bit of oil, but that also just ends up, this can be a process until you end up with nothing, absolutely nothing left in the cavern. And when you have that, well, then it's just it'll be nothing pretty much, because it'll just be collapsed by the weight of the earth.
Thank you for answering. And if you don't have no further questions for us, then I think it'll be a good time to conclude this debate, unless you have any further questions.
No, thanks a lot there, Jacob. We really appreciate you guys meeting us this morning. And given how tough and complicated the abiotic theory is, I was really impressed how well you guys defended it. So I look forward to see how you do in the moot court.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for your time today. We enjoyed the debate as well.
Okay.
Have a good one.
Oh, yeah, Mike, you handy there by chance?
Yeah, I got back. Had to go to a teacher's meeting in the interim.
Yeah, no worries. Just one really quick question, logistics-wise. For our Czechoslovakian meeting on 6 April, I'm not sure, for our topic, what do they plan on discussing?
I think anything to do with alternative energy again. I'm going to email them and email you this afternoon, or maybe it might be Monday morning. But sometime I will do that, and then we'll get completely hammered out.
Okay, because like we can prepare just, I mean, we can all, it would be